I am Elara. I am exactly 32 years old. For 15 agonizing years, I spent every single winter holiday entirely alone, miserably scrolling through curated social media photographs of my entire extended family joyously celebrating together at my grandmother's sprawling coastal estate. For a decade and a half, I sat in isolation, endlessly torturing myself, wondering exactly what horrific crime I had committed to be so aggressively excluded from the invitations. I absolutely never received a straight answer. I never received a single, pathetic apology. I never even received a basic text message checking to see if I was alive. Then, late last January, my beloved grandmother passed away. I brutally discovered this world-shattering news by casually scrolling past a public social media post. Absolutely no one in my biological family bothered to call my phone. I showed up to her solemn burial service awkwardly late, simply because absolutely no one had possessed the basic human decency to inform me that the schedule had been abruptly changed. Exactly 3 weeks after we laid her to rest, a private estate attorney unexpectedly contacted me with a massive, explosive secret my grandmother had successfully kept hidden from absolutely everyone, most notably my own mother. She had legally bequeathed the multi-million-dollar coastal estate entirely to me. I did not breathe a single word of this revelation to anyone. For 11 grueling months, I simply sat in the shadows, maintained my silence, and waited. And this past holiday season, when 23 entitled relatives excitedly arrived at the property expecting their annual, free luxury vacation, they found me standing squarely in the front doorway. What explosively unfolded next permanently altered the entire trajectory of my family's existence. Before I take you through the meticulous, terrifying sequence of events that followed, if you find yourself connecting with stories regarding toxic family dynamics and the terrifying, beautiful journey of finally finding your voice, please take a moment to engage with this video. But I ask that you only do so if this specific narrative truly resonates deep within your own soul. I would also love to know exactly who is sitting in the dark listening to me right now. Please drop a comment letting me know what city you are tuning in from and what time the clock is currently showing in your part of the world. Now, I need you to travel backward in time with me to exactly 11 months ago, to the specific, dreary afternoon I received an unexpected phone call from a man named Arthur Sterling. I violently discovered that my grandmother Beatrice had died by staring blankly at a digital screen. It was not through a tearful, comforting phone call from the woman who birthed me, and certainly not through a supportive text message from my younger sister. It was a highly public social media post casually shared by a distant cousin I barely even recognized. It featured a slightly blurry photograph of grandmother Beatrice smiling warmly in her beloved rose garden, bearing the sterile, generic caption, "Rest in absolute peace, Aunt B." I sat completely paralyzed in my cramped apartment in the city, intensely staring at my glowing phone screen, desperately waiting for someone, absolutely anyone in my bloodline, to call me and break the devastating news. They never did. The formal funeral service was scheduled for exactly 3 days later. I aggressively drove for over 4 grueling hours through heavy, blinding rain to attend the memorial. When I finally arrived at the historic stone church, the solemn service had already commenced. Absolutely no one had bothered to inform me that the start time had been pushed forward by an entire hour. I quietly, humiliatingly slipped into the very back row of the wooden pews. My mother did not turn around to acknowledge my presence. My sister, Victoria, casually glanced over her shoulder at me exactly once, and then immediately looked away as if I were a highly confused, homeless stranger who had accidentally wandered off the street into the wrong private memorial. Following the somber burial at the cemetery, I tentatively attempted to approach my mother. She was deeply surrounded by a thick, protective wall of extended relatives, graciously accepting their hushed condolences and delicately dabbing her perfectly dry eyes with a monogrammed tissue. "Mom," I whispered softly, stepping hesitantly into her peripheral vision. She looked at me with an expression of profound, unfiltered irritation, exactly as if I had rudely interrupted a highly important, exclusive business transaction. "Elara, you actually managed to make it." That was the absolute entirety of the interaction. There was absolutely no maternal hug. There was absolutely no, "I am so incredibly relieved you are here to support me in my grief." Just, "You made it." Delivered with the exact same freezing tone one might use for an uninvited, highly unwelcome guest crashing a private, elite event. Exactly 3 weeks later, my cellular phone unexpectedly vibrated with an unknown number. "Miss Vance," the deep, gravelly voice stated, "my name is Arthur Sterling. I served as your late grandmother's primary estate attorney." I genuinely did not even know grandmother Beatrice possessed a private estate attorney. "I urgently need to convene with you privately," he continued, his tone incredibly grave, measured, and entirely professional. "Please, I explicitly instruct you not to mention this phone call to a single member of your family." I felt my heart completely stop beating in my chest. "Is something legally wrong with the estate, Mr. Sterling?" "No, Ms. Vance. Something is incredibly, profoundly right." A heavy, loaded pause hung over the cellular line. "Your grandmother left highly specific, ironclad instructions. She explicitly stated that I would fully understand exactly why this specific matter must remain strictly, confidentially between the two of us." I aggressively drove the 4 hours back to his city the very next morning, possessing absolutely no idea that I was about to legally inherit the one singular asset my mother coveted more than anything else on this earth. But before we discuss the interior of the lawyer's office, I must explicitly tell you about the holiday photographs. The very first photograph violently appeared on my timeline when I was just 17 years old. December 26th. I was mindlessly scrolling through my social media feed when the glossy image struck me like a physical blow to the stomach. My entire, sprawling extended family was happily gathered in grandmother Beatrice's massive, vaulted living room at the coastal estate. My mother was positioned dead center, her arm wrapped fiercely and protectively around Victoria. Aunts, uncles, and distant cousins I only ever saw at rare funerals seamlessly filled the frame. 23 smiling, joyous people holding elaborately wrapped gifts, all wearing matching, custom-ordered festive sweaters. I was absolutely not in the photograph. I was sitting entirely alone in a dark, silent house hours away. I frantically called my mother's cell phone later that evening. "Mom, why exactly wasn't I invited to the family holiday gathering?" She let out a long, heavy, exasperated sigh, exactly as if I were being an incredibly dramatic, exhausting toddler. "Oh, sweetheart, please. We all just logically assumed you were staying on campus with your intense college preparatory group. Didn't I explicitly tell you that?" She absolutely had not told me anything. The following year, the hollow excuse mutated into, "We simply assumed you were scheduled to work a double shift at your retail job." The year after that, it casually devolved into, "Oh, the massive group text messages must not have successfully delivered to your phone model. You know you are inherently always welcome to attend. Why didn't you just proactively show up?" I actually foolishly attempted to do exactly that once. I was 23 years old. I aggressively drove the long distance to the coastal estate without informing a single soul, naively, pathetically thinking that perhaps if I just physically materialized on the doorstep, they would be socially obligated to include me in the warmth. I knocked tentatively on the heavy wooden door. My mother abruptly opened it. The blood instantly, completely drained from her face, exactly as if she had just witnessed a terrifying, grotesque apparition that absolutely should not exist in her pristine reality. "Elara, what on earth are you doing? How did you?" From deep inside the warm house, I clearly heard Victoria's sharp, condescending voice cut through the ambient noise. Did someone actually, physically invite her to this? The entire massive living room went instantly, deathly quiet. 23 people stopped what they were doing and openly stared at me exactly as if I had aggressively crashed a highly exclusive, private country club event. My mother recovered her polished, societal mask incredibly quickly. "Of course you are welcome here, honey. Please, come inside out of the cold." But I explicitly saw the dark, furious looks exchanged. I noticed the hushed, urgent conversations that instantly evaporated the second I walked past. I saw the deliberate, malicious way Victoria ensured there was absolutely no physical chair available for me at the sprawling, beautifully set dining table. I quietly packed my bag and left before the sun even rose the next morning. I never, ever attempted to crash their party again. For 15 agonizing, lonely years, I spent the winter holidays entirely alone, miserably scrolling through digital photographs of a family that actively, aggressively pretended I did not possess a pulse. Until grandmother Beatrice permanently changed the rules of the game. To fully comprehend exactly why my mother systematically erased my existence, you absolutely must understand the ghost of David Vance. He was my biological father. He tragically died when I was barely 3 years old. I possess absolutely no concrete, linear memories of the man, just scattered sensory fragments. The sharp, chemical scent of oil paint and turpentine. A deep, rich baritone voice softly humming obscure jazz melodies. The terrifying, exhilarating sensation of him lifting me high onto his broad shoulders so I could pretend to touch the ceiling. He was a passionate, struggling artist. He was a wild dreamer. He was a man who inherently believed in the pursuit of creation significantly more than he believed in paying the utility bills on time. My mother impulsively married him when she was only 19 years old. She was incredibly young, fiercely rebellious, and supposedly madly in love. Her wealthy, aristocratic parents deeply disapproved of the union. Her socialite friends aggressively warned her against it. But my mother stubbornly followed her romantic heart. And then, the crushing, mundane reality of poverty inevitably set in. David simply could not manage to secure or maintain steady, conventional employment. His abstract, chaotic paintings absolutely failed to sell in the local galleries. They barely survived in a decaying, drafty one-bedroom apartment featuring a chronically leaking roof and a colicky infant who screamed through the night. When I was exactly 3 years old, David was driving home late one evening from a minor, insignificant gallery showing, his very first legitimate chance at securing artistic success. A massive commercial delivery truck violently ran a red light. He was killed instantly on impact. The exact same abstract paintings that utterly failed to sell while he was breathing are currently appraised at 6 figures in the modern art market. But my mother absolutely did not want the retroactive wealth. She desperately, exclusively wanted to permanently forget her shameful mistake. She hastily remarried exactly 2 years later. She married Richard Collins. He was incredibly stable, financially successful, and aggressively, boringly safe. They birthed Victoria when I was 7 years old. And slowly, methodically, and with terrifying precision, my mother began the aggressive process of permanently erasing David Vance from the historical record. She absolutely never spoke his name aloud. She systematically destroyed or hid every single photograph of him. When nosy, extended relatives inquired about her brief, tragic first marriage, she flawlessly changed the subject. And me? I inherited his exact eyes. Deep, piercing, highly unusual blue-gray eyes. Unmistakable eyes. Grandmother Beatrice was the singular human being who possessed the courage to tell me the unvarnished truth. Your mother absolutely does not hate your soul, Elara, she whispered to me once, gently stroking my hair as I violently sobbed on her porch swing after enduring yet another holiday season completely alone. She intensely hates exactly what your face constantly reminds her of. I was far too young to fully comprehend the devastating weight of that statement then. But the exact moment I crossed the threshold into Arthur Sterling's private law office, the entire, horrifying reality finally clicked into place. Arthur Sterling's private office was situated in a historic, towering brick building in the heart of the downtown district. It was the specific kind of intimidating place that smelled intensely of aging, leather-bound legal volumes, and massive, life-altering decisions. He was significantly older than I had anticipated. He possessed thick, silver hair, incredibly kind eyes, and a firm, grounding handshake that felt exactly like an unbreakable promise. "Thank you so much for making the journey, Ms. Vance," he said, gesturing toward a heavy, cracked leather armchair. "Please, make yourself comfortable." I rigidly sat down. My hands were visibly, violently shaking in my lap. He slowly slid a thick, ivory envelope across the polished expanse of his desk. "Your late grandmother explicitly requested that I hand you this specific document first, before we dive into the dense legal logistics of the estate." The heavy, cream-colored envelope bore my full legal name, meticulously written in Grandmother Beatrice's fragile, shaky cursive script. I carefully broke the wax seal, treating the paper as if it were a highly explosive device. Tucked inside was a single, handwritten page of stationery. My dearest, beautiful Elara, if you are currently reading these words, then my physical body has finally failed me. But before I permanently departed this earth, I desperately needed to make a catastrophic wrong entirely right. You are the absolute only human being in this sprawling, greedy family who never once asked me for a single material possession. You faithfully visited my home every single Sunday afternoon. You did not come to secure my wealth. You did not come to stake a claim on the coastal property. You came exclusively for me. You called my phone simply to hear the sound of my aging voice. You sat silently beside me when I was terribly ill, when I was paralyzed with fear, and when I was utterly, completely lonely. Your mother and your sister exclusively visited when they required a financial bailout or a favor. You showed up purely because you loved my soul. So, I am legally leaving absolutely everything to you. They will inevitably, viciously claim that my mind was failing. They will maliciously scream that you psychologically manipulated a dying woman. But I have absolutely never been more terrified and crystal clear about anything in my entire 8 decades of life. The coastal estate is legally yours. Absolutely all of it. Do with the property exactly what you wish. I simply ask that you make me one final, sacred promise. Please, Elara, stop allowing them to make you invisible. With all my eternal love, Grandma. I slowly looked up at Arthur. My vision was completely blurred with hot, thick tears. The coastal estate? I whispered, the words barely escaping my throat. She actually left the massive beach house to me? Arthur offered a slow, solemn nod. The physical deed, the sprawling property, the surrounding acreage, absolutely everything. She meticulously prepared this specific legal maneuver over 5 years ago, and she aggressively updated the documentation twice, specifically to create an ironclad defense against any potential familial contestation. He leaned intensely forward across the desk. Ms. Vance, your grandmother fully anticipated massive, violent resistance from your mother. This final will is absolutely legally bulletproof. I sat completely paralyzed in that heavy leather chair for a very long time, clutching my grandmother's final letter against my chest exactly as if it were the only physical object keeping my body tethered to the Earth's gravity. The coastal estate. The massive, beautiful sanctuary where my entire extended family joyously gathered every single winter without me. The exact location where they staged those elaborate, matching sweater photographs and aggressively pretended I did not possess a pulse. The sprawling property, recently appraised at a staggering $2.3 million, that my mother had been salivating over and claiming as her eventual inheritance for decades. And Grandmother Beatrice had secretly, legally bequeathed the entire empire to me. Arthur cleared his throat softly, breaking the heavy silence. Ms. Vance, I urgently need to ask you a procedural question. Do you wish for my office to immediately notify your immediate family regarding the contents of the will? I stared directly into his eyes. 15 agonizing years. 15 consecutive, lonely winter holidays. 15 separate occasions where I had discovered my brutal exclusion through a glowing digital screen, sitting completely alone in my freezing apartment, endlessly torturing myself wondering what horrific flaw I possessed that made me so inherently unlovable. And now, for the absolute first time in my entire 32 years of existence, I possess the one, singular asset they desperately, greedily wanted. No, I stated, my voice ringing with a newfound, terrifying clarity. Absolutely not yet. Arthur slowly nodded his head. He did not appear surprised in the slightest. Your grandmother explicitly predicted you would choose that exact path. She did? He reached deep into his locked desk drawer and produced a secondary, much smaller envelope, also sealed with dark red wax. She left highly specific, conditional instructions for me. She explicitly stated, when Elara looks you in the eye and tells you she desires to wait, hand her this envelope. I aggressively tore it open. Inside was a single, brief sentence written in her familiar script. I intrinsically knew you would require time to process this. Take absolutely all the time you need to heal. But when you are finally, truly ready, show those monsters exactly who you are. I carefully folded the small note and securely tucked it into my coat pocket. "Mr. Sterling," I said, leaning forward. "Exactly how long does the legal process take to formally transfer the physical property deed into my name? With your full, aggressive cooperation, approximately 3 to 4 weeks. And if I explicitly demand that the entire transaction remains strictly, legally private and confidential?" He offered a tiny, incredibly sharp smile. "I have been aggressively practicing estate law in this city for over 40 years, Ms. Vance. I am intimately familiar with how to execute absolute discretion." I confidently stood up from the chair. "Then let us aggressively begin the process." 11 grueling months. That is exactly how long I sat in the shadows and waited. And during that agonizing period of silence, I deeply learned exactly what my grandmother had already fundamentally understood. Absolute patience is not a symptom of weakness. It is the ultimate, terrifying form of strategy. The subsequent 11 months felt exactly like actively living two entirely separate, parallel existences. In my primary, visible life, I remained Elara Vance, the exhausted senior accountant at a private firm in Raleigh. I meticulously filed endless reports. I attended grueling board meetings. I quietly ate my packed lunch entirely alone at my cubicle desk. In my secondary, hidden life, I was aggressively, quietly becoming the sole legal proprietor of a $2.3 million coastal luxury estate that my greedy family possessed absolutely zero knowledge belonged exclusively to me. In late February, I signed the final, towering stack of legal paperwork. Arthur formally handed me a brand new set of brass keys and a massive, thick folder overflowing with certified deeds and tax documents. "It is officially completed," he announced with a firm handshake. "The property is legally, undeniably yours." April arrived, bringing the Easter holiday. I received absolutely zero invitations to the family gathering. I had not expected a single one. July ushered in Victoria's milestone birthday. I foolishly opened my social media application and was immediately assaulted by 47 high-resolution photographs geographically tagged at the coastal estate. Images of my mother triumphantly raising a crystal champagne flute on the massive wraparound deck. Photographs of my older sister joyously blowing out expensive candles in the grand dining room. Videos of my distant cousin's children wildly running through the massive living room that I now legally owned. I meticulously took high-resolution screenshots and saved every single photograph and video file. Aggressive documentation, Arthur had clinically called it. Irrefutable, digital evidence of unauthorized property use and trespassing. September rolled around. I was casually checking my email inbox when I discovered a forwarded message from Aunt Josephine, my grandmother's younger sister. It was a leaked screenshot from a massive family group chat that I had, predictably, never been added to. My mother had arrogantly typed, "Mom's old beach house is in desperate need of some significant structural maintenance before the holiday season. I am proactively scheduling a premium contractor to arrive next month. I will personally handle covering the exorbitant bill." She was actively scheduling massive, structural renovations on my private property. She was aggressively spending thousands of dollars to improve my real estate without asking a single question, without possessing an ounce of legal authority, and without knowing I held the deed. I immediately panic-dialed Arthur. "What on earth do I do about this?" "Let her proceed," he stated with a dark chuckle. "Meticulously save every single receipt she generates. She is currently executing massive, free capital improvements on your primary asset." The expensive contractor arrived at the property in October. They installed premium, weather-resistant roof shingles, applied a fresh coat of high-end paint to the sprawling deck, and upgraded the kitchen with state-of-the-art, stainless steel appliances. My mother aggressively paid over $12,000 out of her own pocket to renovate a luxury home that legally belonged to the daughter she actively despised. I meticulously saved every single generated invoice. November arrived, and I began aggressively finalizing my battle plan. On the 23rd of December, I confidently boarded a commercial flight heading toward North Carolina. I carried a heavy, reinforced briefcase overflowing with certified legal documents and 15 agonizing years of suffocating silence densely packed into a single, Terrifying word, enough. Exactly 1 week prior to the Christmas holiday, I executed a highly specific, calculated phone call to the local county sheriff's precinct. I would like to formally report a massive, impending trespassing situation at a private residence, I stated clearly to the dispatcher. I am the sole legal proprietor of a luxury estate located on the Outer Banks. I possess concrete, documented evidence leading me to believe that a massive group of unauthorized individuals will aggressively attempt to breach the property without my legal consent on the morning of December 24th. The responding deputy on the line, who formally introduced himself as Deputy Marcus, was incredibly patient, highly professional, and slightly skeptical. Ma'am, are you currently capable of legally proving absolute ownership of the property in question? I possess the certified physical deed, the finalized title, the updated municipal tax records, and the previous owner's fully probated legal will, all heavily notarized by a prominent estate attorney. A heavy, impressed pause hung on the line. That is incredibly thorough preparation, ma'am. I have possessed exactly 11 months to meticulously prepare for this specific morning. We formally arranged to convene at the property early on Christmas Eve morning. He would comprehensively verify my mountain of documentation. If the paperwork flawlessly checked out, he agreed to be physically present on the grounds when my family inevitably arrived to launch their invasion. Ma'am, Deputy Marcus asked right before terminating the call, are you absolutely, undeniably certain you wish to proceed with this aggressive action? Intrafamily property disputes can quickly escalate into highly volatile, complicated situations. Deputy, I replied, my voice cold as ice. My extended family has been aggressively utilizing my private property for 15 years without my knowledge, my consent, or my presence. I would strongly argue that the situation is already incredibly, violently complicated. The late evening before I was scheduled to fly out, my cell phone unexpectedly vibrated on my nightstand. It was Aunt Josephine. Elara, honey, it is Josephine. I just desperately wanted to check in on your mental state. I almost dropped the phone in shock. Aunt Josephine was literally the only relative in the entire sprawling family tree who ever bothered to inquire about my existence. She was the singular person who occasionally possessed the backbone to subtly push back when my mother aggressively controlled the family narrative. I am perfectly fine, Aunt Josephine, I replied cautiously. Are you absolutely certain, my sweet girl? I always deeply wonder why you are entirely absent from these massive family gatherings. Diane constantly claims you aggressively prefer to be isolated and alone, but she trailed off, the doubt heavy in her voice. Aunt Josephine, I said, choosing my words with extreme care. You will completely understand absolutely everything very soon. What exactly do you mean by that statement? Just, please try not to be overly shocked by whatever explosive event occurs tomorrow morning. She remained completely quiet for a long, analyzing moment. Elara, what on earth are you planning to do? I offered a genuine, terrifying smile. It was my very first authentic smile in months. I am simply planning to finally show up for once. I abruptly ended the call, meticulously packed my overnight bag, and, surprisingly, fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. Tomorrow, I was finally going to forcefully stop being the invisible ghost in my own life. The sprawling coastal estate looked exactly as breathtaking and imposing as I remembered it. I arrived on the crisp, freezing evening of December 23rd, just as the brilliant winter sun was violently setting over the dark, churning waters of the Outer Banks. The brand new, brass key Arthur had provided me slid flawlessly into the heavy, upgraded deadbolt lock I had aggressively paid a locksmith to install exactly 2 months prior. My mother's ancient, copied key would absolutely no longer grant her access to the kingdom. I stepped over the threshold and stood completely still in the grand, vaulted entryway, pulling the familiar, intoxicating scent of sharp salt air and aged cedar would deep into my lungs. The absolute last time I had physically stood in this exact spot, I was 23 years old, aggressively uninvited and violently unwanted. I had fled the premises before the sun even rose to avoid further humiliation. Now I had finally returned. And this time, I legally owned every single square inch of the property. I walked slowly and methodically through the massive house, inspecting it room by room. The sprawling living room featuring its towering, raw stone fireplace. The pristine, upgraded kitchen that my mother had literally just renovated utilizing her own funds for a house that was technically mine. The sprawling bedrooms located on the second floor, each space holding decades of joyous holiday memories that I had only ever been permitted to witness through glowing digital screens. Resting prominently on the heavy wooden mantel, I located exactly what I was searching for. A massive, silver-framed photograph taken exactly 3 years ago. 23 smiling, vibrant people all wearing matching, obnoxious red festive sweaters, grinning brightly at the camera lens. Grandmother Beatrice sat regally in the absolute center, looking incredibly frail, exhausted, but genuinely happy. I was undeniably absent from the picture. I never, ever was included. I slowly picked up the heavy silver frame and intensely studied the composition. My mother stood aggressively at grandmother's right shoulder, her hand resting heavily and possessively on the older woman's arm. Victoria was positioned on the left, proudly hoisting her young daughter on her hip. Various aunts, uncles, and distant cousins seamlessly filled every single available inch of negative space in the frame. There was absolutely no physical room left for me. There absolutely never had been. I firmly set the photograph back down onto the center of the glass coffee table. Tomorrow morning, they would all be forced to look at it. They would forever remember exactly where they were physically standing in this room when the axis of their entire universe violently shifted. In grandmother's old, dusty master bedroom, I uncovered a significantly smaller, delicate wooden frame. It was a photograph I had absolutely never seen before in my life. It was a candid shot of me and grandmother Beatrice, taken approximately 6 months before her fatal decline. We were sitting closely together on this exact same wraparound porch, laughing hysterically at some private joke that I could no longer recall. She had kept it safely hidden on her nightstand, intentionally concealed from the probing, judgmental eyes of the rest of the family. I gently picked it up and carried it downstairs, placing it precisely in the absolute, dead center of the massive living room mantelpiece. Tomorrow morning, I would absolutely no longer be the invisible ghost haunting this house. Christmas Eve morning, 7 o'clock sharp. I woke up in grandmother Beatrice's massive, 4-poster bed, my bed now to the rhythmic, soothing sound of heavy ocean waves violently crashing against the shoreline just outside the panoramic window. For a brief, disorienting moment, I completely forgot where I was physically located. Then, the adrenaline hit my system. I remembered that today was the day of reckoning. I took a scalding shower, meticulously dried my hair, and stood completely still in front of the massive oak closet. I had aggressively packed incredibly light for this trip. Heavy, certified legal documents, basic toiletries, and exactly one specific outfit I had carefully, strategically chosen for this explosive moment. It was a deeply rich, luxurious burgundy cashmere sweater. It was grandmother Beatrice's absolute favorite signature color. She used to always tell me that vibrant red was exclusively reserved for people who aggressively refused to disappear into the background. I slipped the soft sweater on, applied a light layer of foundation, and carefully applied a classic, bold red lipstick, the exact same iconic shade she used to wear to formal events. When I finally looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror, I absolutely did not see the pathetic, broken woman who had allowed herself to be completely erased for 15 agonizing years. I saw a terrifyingly different person staring back. I saw a woman prepared for absolute war. At exactly 8:30, my cell phone aggressively buzzed on the nightstand. Ms. Vance, Deputy Marcus's voice was crisp and professional. I am currently en route to the location. Thank you so much, Deputy, I replied smoothly. I will have all the necessary documentation prepared for your immediate review. I methodically spread my mountain of paperwork across the massive, sprawling mahogany dining room table. The certified, original will. The finalized, notarized property deed. The municipal tax records irrefutably proving I had personally paid the exorbitant property taxes for the past 11 consecutive months. The detailed contractor invoices my mother had unknowingly, generously generated. Arthur's highly official, signed letter legally confirming the absolute transfer of assets. And finally, 23 pristine copies of a formalized, aggressive eviction notice. One specific notice, meticulously printed for every single adult family member scheduled to arrive. Deputy Marcus arrived at exactly 10 o'clock in the morning. He was an incredibly imposing, tall man in his mid-40s, possessing the calm, unshakable demeanor of a law enforcement officer who had witnessed absolutely every form of human depravity. He sat at the dining table and reviewed every single document with agonizing, meticulous care. This entire file appears to be completely, 100% legitimate, ma'am, he stated, slowly looking up to meet my eyes. You truly, legally own this entire multi-million-dollar estate. I really, undeniably do, I confirmed softly. And your extended family currently possesses absolutely no knowledge of this fact? They will be violently made aware of it in approximately 2 hours. He nodded his head with profound, slow understanding. I will remain discreetly positioned on the property when they inevitably arrive. But ma'am, he leaned forward, his expression turning incredibly serious. Are you absolutely, undeniably certain you wish to initiate this explosive conflict? Once this specific bell is rung, there is absolutely no unringing it. You can never go back. I stood there and thought about 15 agonizingly lonely Christmases. 15 consecutive years of being completely, intentionally forgotten and discarded like garbage. I have absolutely never been more certain of anything in my entire existence. He respectfully handed the thick stack of documents back to me. Then let us quietly wait for the storm to arrive. At exactly 47 minutes past 11, I spotted the very first vehicle aggressively turn onto the long, winding gravel driveway. I was standing perfectly still, partially hidden behind the heavy curtains of the second-story master bedroom window, quietly observing the invasion. Deputy Marcus remained patiently waiting inside his marked patrol vehicle, which was discreetly parked and heavily obscured behind a thick cluster of ancient maritime pine trees situated at the far edge of the property line. My mother's massive, gleaming silver luxury SUV confidently led the sprawling procession. Closely behind her followed Victoria's pristine white Range Rover, then Richard's aggressive black BMW, followed by car after car after car. Aunts, uncles, distant cousins, their respective spouses, and their chaotic children. 6 massive vehicles in total. 23 entitled human beings, plus an absolute mountain of expensive luggage, gaudy Christmas decorations, and enough premium groceries to comfortably feed a small militia for a week. They aggressively poured out of their luxury vehicles, acting exactly as if they owned the entire estate. Because, in their deeply diseased minds, they genuinely believed they did. I silently watched my mother confidently stride up the brick pathway toward the heavy front door, a massive ring of keys jangling aggressively in her manicured hand. She was draped in a luxurious, cream-colored wool coat and wearing her signature string of expensive pearls. Always the pearls. Her entire physical posture aggressively radiated absolute ownership, arrogant authority, and total control. Victoria followed closely on her heels, loudly barking orders at her exhausted husband to quickly unload the heaviest suitcases. Ensure you place the massive luggage directly into the master bedroom suite, she commanded shrilly. Mom and Dad always claim that specific room. My room now. My master bedroom suite. The chaotic children sprinted ahead toward the porch, loudly shouting about hitting the beach, about opening presents, and about all the incredible activities they planned to do this week in Grandma Beatrice's house. It was absolutely not Grandma Beatrice's house anymore. Slowly, almost completely unnoticed amidst the chaotic unloading, Deputy Marcus's marked patrol vehicle smoothly pulled out of its concealed hiding spot and began slowly rolling down the long gravel driveway toward the house. Absolutely no one noticed the approaching cruiser. They were entirely too consumed with unloading their bags, chattering loudly and aggressively claiming their preferred spaces inside the house. I began slowly, methodically walking down the grand, sweeping wooden staircase. Every single step I took creaked loudly against the old wood. It was the exact same staircase I had terrifiedly crept down 9 agonizing years ago, desperately trying to remain completely invisible, desperately trying to simply belong to a family. I was absolutely not trying to belong anymore. I reached the heavy front entryway at the exact microsecond my mother aggressively jammed her copied key into the brass deadbolt lock. I heard the metal violently click, and then I immediately heard her frustrated, confused voice echoing through the heavy wood. What in the name of Richard? The stupid key is absolutely not turning. I smiled a terrifying, razor-sharp smile, reached out and forcefully pulled the heavy door wide open. The look of absolute, unadulterated shock that violently registered on my mother's face when that door swung open is an image that will remain permanently burned into my retinas until the day I die. She was standing frozen on the welcome mat, the useless key still gripped tightly in her hand, her mouth hanging completely slack as she was mid-complaint to Richard regarding the faulty lock. And then, her eyes finally focused on me. For 3 entire, agonizing seconds, absolutely no one on that porch breathed a single word. I stood confidently in the center of the doorway, draped in my grandmother's signature color, my right hand resting incredibly casually against the heavy wooden doorframe. Behind me in the living room, the massive fire I had constructed that morning crackled warmly, filling the house with the intoxicating, nostalgic scent of cinnamon and burning cedar wood. Classic Christmas smells. Elara. My mother's voice violently cracked, sounding exactly like dry, crushed leaves. What are you? How on earth did you get inside this house? Good morning, Mom, I replied, my voice dripping with icy pleasantness. I did not move a single inch from my dominant position in the doorway. Richard abruptly appeared right behind her shoulder, his brow furrowed in deep annoyance. The locks must be severely jammed or rusted. Let me try to force it. The locks are absolutely not broken, Richard, I stated calmly, maintaining intense eye contact with my mother. They are completely brand new. I had a locksmith aggressively change them 2 months ago. Total, suffocating silence descended upon the porch. Victoria violently pushed her way to the front of the crowd, her beautiful face contorted into an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated confusion and rage. You actually possess the sheer audacity to change the physical locks on Mom's house? It is absolutely not Mom's house, I replied smoothly. My mother let out a sharp, high-pitched, incredibly nervous laugh that bordered on hysteria. Elara, what bizarre, psychotic delusion are you currently experiencing? This is obviously my late mother's property. I honestly do not know what kind of sick joke you are attempting to. It is entirely my property, I interrupted, my voice echoing with terrifying authority. It has been legally, exclusively my property for the past 11 months. More suffocating, terrified silence. Behind the frozen cluster of family members, I watched Deputy Marcus slowly step out of his idling patrol vehicle. He casually leaned against the side of his cruiser, quietly observing the standoff. Aunt Josephine was the very first person in the crowd to spot his uniform. Diane, she gasped, pointing a trembling finger. Why on earth is there an armed police officer parked on the driveway? Every single person violently turned around. 23 stunned individuals openly stared at the flashing lights of the patrol car exactly as if a spaceship had just materialized out of thin air. I specifically requested his presence here today, I stated, my voice cutting through their shock. I anticipated that several of you might experience severe cognitive difficulty comprehending the reality of this situation. My mother's facial expression instantly morphed from utter confusion to pure, unhinged, violent fury. What exact situation are you referring to? What insane garbage are you spewing right now? I strongly believe we should conduct this conversation outside in the freezing air, I stated calmly. Considering the fact that this is my private residence, and absolutely none of you have been formally invited to cross my threshold. I slowly took a step backward and began to deliberately pull the heavy door shut. Wait right there, my mother violently lurched forward, attempting to jam her expensive leather boot into the doorframe to prevent it from closing. You absolutely cannot do this to us. Actually, Mom, I smiled a terrifying, razor-sharp smile. I absolutely can. I forcefully pulled the door wider open, absolutely not to invite them inside, but to ensure every single person crowding the driveway possessed a crystal-clear, unobstructed view of my face. The brutal December wind violently whipped across the expansive porch, cutting through their expensive coats with a sharp, freezing intensity. My massive, entitled family stood completely clustered together on the wooden steps, looking exactly like a group of wealthy carolers who had suddenly, violently forgotten the lyrics to their song. The terrified children aggressively huddled behind their parents' legs. Dozens of expensive, designer suitcases sat completely abandoned on the freezing gravel driveway. "This is absolute, pure insanity," my mother viciously snapped, her voice trembling with rage. "Richard, immediately call the local police precinct." "The local police are already currently present on the scene, ma'am," Deputy Marcus announced, his heavy boots crunching loudly on the gravel as he calmly walked up the pathway. His vocal tone carried the specific, unshakable authority of a man who had successfully de-escalated 1,000 identical, chaotic situations. "I am Deputy Marcus. I was explicitly requested to arrive at this location to proactively assist Ms. Vance with a massive, impending property dispute." "There is absolutely no property dispute occurring here," my mother shrieked, her voice reaching a hysterical pitch. "This is my deceased mother's estate. With all due respect to your situation, ma'am, it absolutely is not." Deputy Marcus confidently stopped directly beside me on the porch. "I have personally, forensically reviewed the certified deed, the updated municipal title, and the finalized probate records. This entire estate legally, undeniably belongs to Elara Vance." Has for nearly an entire year. I stood in silence and watched the devastating, catastrophic information violently ripple through the assembled crowd. Several older aunts exchanged terrified, horrified glances. Uncles uncomfortably shifted their weight from foot to foot. Victoria desperately grabbed Richard's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his expensive jacket exactly like a drowning woman desperately searching for a piece of floating debris to cling to. "That is mathematically impossible," Victoria shrieked, her voice echoing off the siding of the house. "Grandmother would absolutely never, ever do something like that to us." "She absolutely did," I replied smoothly. I reached behind the heavy door and retrieved the thick, overflowing manila folder, the exact same folder I had meticulously prepared 11 agonizing months ago. This is a certified, notarized copy of her final, unalterable will. She legally, explicitly bequeathed the entirety of the coastal estate exclusively to me. My mother violently snatched the thick folder directly out of my hands. Her frantic eyes aggressively scanned the dense legal pages, her face rapidly draining of all blood and turning a sickly, translucent shade of gray with every single line she absorbed. This cannot possibly be authentic. She was suffering from severe medical confusion. She had debilitating dementia. Her primary attending physician is fully prepared to testify under oath that she remained completely, cognitively sound until exactly 2 weeks prior to her passing, I stated, maintaining my vocal tone at a terrifyingly level, clinical pitch. She explicitly, perfectly knew exactly what she was legally executing. Aunt Josephine slowly stepped forward from the back of the frozen crowd, pressing her hand tightly over her pounding heart. "Elara, Beatrice genuinely left the entire estate to you?" I looked directly at her. She was literally the singular person in this massive, greedy crowd who had ever possessed the basic human decency to ask why I was conspicuously absent from the holiday celebrations. Yes, Aunt Josephine, she undeniably did. The heavy, suffocating silence that immediately followed my confirmation was absolutely deafening. Deputy Marcus confidently stepped forward, and the dense crowd of relatives instinctively parted for him exactly like Moses parting the Red Sea. "Folks, I completely understand that this situation is highly unexpected and emotionally distressing for you." His deep voice carried the distinct, unwavering authority of someone accustomed to delivering life-altering bad news. But the legal statutes in this state are incredibly clear and entirely undeniable. Ms. Vance is the sole, legal proprietor of this property. I have personally verified the authenticity of the documentation. Richard awkwardly cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the narrative. "Officer, surely there must be some sort of massive clerical misunderstanding occurring here. This family has been continuously, happily utilizing this exact property for 15 consecutive years." I violently cut him off before he could finish the sentence. You aggressively utilized it for 15 years completely without my knowledge and utterly without my legal permission. Because I was entirely unaware that I owned the property until exactly 11 months ago. You genuinely did not know? Victoria's voice dripped with pure, venomous skepticism. How incredibly convenient for your narrative. Your grandmother intentionally chose to keep the arrangement entirely private, Deputy Marcus interjected smoothly. That was entirely her legal prerogative. And now it is completely Ms. Vance's legal choice regarding how to proceed with the asset. My mother was still fiercely clutching the legal folder to her chest, her knuckles turning stark white from the pressure. I am immediately contacting a ruthless corporate litigator. This will is a blatant, malicious fabrication. My mother would absolutely never betray me like this. Your mother absolutely did betray you, Mom, I stated, meeting her terrified eyes with unyielding ice. She also perfectly anticipated that you would attempt to scream exactly that, which is precisely why she retained Arthur Sterling, a ruthless estate attorney boasting 40 years of unparalleled experience, to draft the document with extensive, ironclad legal protections explicitly designed to obliterate any attempted contestation from you. I calmly reached deep into my coat pocket and pulled out a massive, thick stack of freshly printed papers, every single one bearing a highly official, intimidating municipal seal. These are formal, legally binding eviction notices. I possess exactly one document for every single adult currently standing on my driveway. I slowly began forcefully handing them out to the stunned relatives. You possess exactly 30 minutes to immediately remove any remaining personal belongings from your parked vehicles. After that strict deadline expires, if you are found remaining on my private property, Deputy Marcus will aggressively escort you off the premises in handcuffs for criminal trespassing. The harsh, white notices were silently, fearfully passed from trembling hand to trembling hand. Some relatives stared blankly at the text, others simply refused to look at them. My cousin David finally spoke up from the absolute back of the frozen crowd. Elara, please, come on. It is literally Christmas Eve. Can we not simply sit down inside and rationally discuss this situation like a normal family? We easily could have rationally discussed this situation during any of the 15 previous Christmases you all comfortably spent inside this house while aggressively ensuring I was never invited, I replied, offering a cold, indifferent shrug. I possess plenty of free time to discuss it now. Do any of you? Absolutely no one possessed the courage to offer a single word in response. My mother completely, violently exploded. You maliciously manipulated a dying woman, she shrieked, violently hurling the legal folder onto the freezing ground, sending the pages scattering chaotically across the wooden porch. You aggressively poisoned her mind against her own family. You are a scheming, pathologically ungrateful monster. Exactly when was the absolute last time you bothered to visit her hospital room, Mom? She abruptly stopped mid-sentence, her mouth hanging open. I faithfully visited her bedside every single Sunday afternoon for 5 consecutive years. I continued relentlessly, my voice rising in volume. I sat holding her fragile hand when she was paralyzed with fear. I physically held her while she was actively dying. When was the absolute last time you bothered to show up? And I absolutely do not mean showing up for a holiday vacation when you desired free access to the house. I mean showing up simply to spend time with her. My mother's mouth opened and closed repeatedly, exactly like a suffocating fish. Absolutely zero coherent words emerged. Victoria frantically attempted to rescue her from the humiliation. That absolutely does not grant you the moral right to maliciously steal our rightful inheritance. Your rightful inheritance? I let out a dark, bitter laugh, a terrifying sound that I barely recognized as my own. You explicitly mean the luxury house you have been aggressively utilizing for absolutely free for an entire decade and a half? The massive house you arrogantly scheduled massive structural repairs on without even bothering to ask who actually held the deed? I slowly turned to face the stunned crowd. My mother recently paid a contractor $12,000 in raw cash this past October to completely renovate this kitchen. She absolutely did not ask for my permission. She did not even know she was legally required to ask, because she aggressively, arrogantly assumed she inherently owned an asset that absolutely never belonged to her in the first place. Aunt Josephine's sharp voice suddenly cut through the unbearable, suffocating tension. Diane, when was the absolute last time you extended a genuine invitation for Elara to attend a holiday gathering? The massive, devastating question hung suspended in the freezing air like thick, toxic smoke. My mother violently whirled around to face her older sister. That is absolutely not. She never, ever wanted to attend our gatherings. She aggressively prefers to isolate herself and be completely alone. I absolutely never wanted to attend, I stated, maintaining my vocal tone terrifyingly steady. Or perhaps I was simply never, ever informed of when the gathering was actually occurring. Total, devastating silence. 23 people were standing on my driveway, and absolutely not a single one of them possessed the courage to meet my eyes. Then, my mother finally screamed the horrific words that completely, permanently changed the trajectory of the universe. Fine. You desperately want to know the unvarnished truth about why you are never, ever invited to anything? Because I physically cannot stomach looking at your face. Every single time I look into your eyes, I see him. Your pathetic, worthless father. That useless, dreaming, artistic failure who completely ruined my life. The entire crowd went completely, deathly still. Okay, I need to abruptly pause the narrative here for a second. I am fully aware that some of you watching might be sitting there thinking, she should have simply attempted to communicate with them like an adult. And perhaps, in a perfect world, you are right. Perhaps I should have attempted diplomacy. But here is my direct question to you. If a group of people aggressively, intentionally ignores your existence for 15 years, do you genuinely owe them a polite conversation? Type yes in the comments if you believe I should have attempted to talk it out first. Type NO if you believe aggressive, undeniable actions speak infinitely louder than polite words. I will be reading every single comment after this video. The absolute, terrifying silence that immediately followed my mother's horrific outburst was unlike anything I had ever experienced in my life. 23 individuals stood completely frozen in the biting December cold, their warm breath forming tiny, terrified clouds that rapidly dissipated into the freezing air. Even the chaotic children had gone entirely quiet, instinctively sensing that something foundational and terrible had violently shifted in the atmosphere. Victoria's voice emerged from her throat sounding choked and strangled. Mom, what on earth are you talking about? My mother's face had drained of all blood, turning a sickly, stark white. She stared down at her trembling hands as if they belonged to a complete stranger, as if they had just violently betrayed her. I absolutely did not mean to say, she started to stammer. That is not what David Vance, I stated quietly, my voice echoing clearly. My biological father. The man you impulsively married before Richard. The man you have spent 30 entire years aggressively attempting to erase from the historical record. Richard took a hesitant step forward, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. Diane, what exactly is she talking about? My mother absolutely could not bring herself to look him in the eye. Aunt Josephine spoke up, her voice trembling, barely rising above a whisper. Diane, you intentionally excluded your own flesh and blood daughter for 15 years simply because of David? You absolutely do not understand the situation. My mother's voice cracked violently. Every single time I am forced to look at her, I see his ghost. I see his exact eyes. His expressions. I am constantly forced to see all the massive, humiliating mistakes I made in my youth. All the years I foolishly wasted on him. She was just an innocent child, Aunt Josephine's voice sharpened into a blade. She absolutely did not choose her biological father. She did not consciously choose to inherit his eyes. I know that, my mother suddenly shrieked, her voice echoing off the siding of the house. And then, much quieter, brokenly. I know that. I stood completely still and looked at my mother. I truly, deeply looked at the woman who had systematically, aggressively removed my presence from every single family gathering for a decade and a half. The monster who had relentlessly gaslit me into believing I was suffering from paranoid delusions regarding my exclusion. The woman who had successfully, maliciously taught my older sister that my existence was entirely disposable. And I felt a profound emotion that I had absolutely not anticipated. It was not burning anger. It was pure, suffocating pity. You simply could not manage to forgive a man who was already dead, I stated softly, staring directly into her soul. So you maliciously decided to punish the absolute only part of him that managed to survive. My mother's face completely crumpled in agony for a brief moment. I genuinely thought she might finally break down and cry. But she absolutely did not apologize to me. She never, ever did. I possessed the absolute power to completely destroy her reputation right there in front of the entire extended family. I could have aggressively listed every single Christmas she had maliciously excluded me from, every single toxic lie she had spun, every single occasion she had intentionally made me feel exactly like a worthless ghost haunting my own life. I could have made her feel exactly as small and insignificant as she had aggressively made me feel for 15 years. But that was absolutely not why I was standing on that porch. "Deputy Marcus," I announced, turning my back entirely on my weeping mother. "Please graciously grant them exactly 30 minutes to aggressively remove any remaining personal belongings from their vehicles. Then, I want every single human being completely removed from my private property." "Now wait just a damn minute," Richard aggressively started forward. 30 minutes, Richard, I interrupted smoothly. "That is significantly more consideration and grace than I have ever received from this family in my entire life." Victoria desperately clutched her terrified daughter against her leg. "Elara, the innocent children, it is literally Christmas Eve. You cannot possibly just throw us out into the freezing cold with absolutely nowhere to sleep." "There are exactly 3 luxury hotels located in the downtown district," I replied, maintaining my voice at a terrifyingly even, professional pitch. "I proactively called ahead yesterday afternoon. They possess abundant vacancies. I already made the helpful recommendation to hold several blocks of rooms for a massive, displaced family." Victoria's mouth physically dropped open in shock. "I am absolutely not attempting to ruin anyone's holiday celebration," I continued, sweeping my gaze across the frozen crowd. "I am not maliciously trying to make anyone suffer needlessly. I simply want to claim exactly what should have been rightfully mine all along, the absolute, legal right to dictate exactly who is permitted to cross the threshold of my own home." Deputy Marcus confidently stepped forward from the shadows. "You heard the property owner, folks. Exactly 30 minutes on the clock. I will be aggressively timing you." One by one, the massive crowd of relatives began to move incredibly slowly, acting deeply reluctant and shell-shocked. Heavy, expensive suitcases were silently hoisted back into the trunks of luxury SUVs. Terrified, crying children were hastily ushered into the back seats of vehicles. Heavy car doors slammed shut with the hollow, reverberating sound of absolute, crushing defeat. My mother stood completely motionless on the freezing porch, staring at me exactly as if she were seeing my face for the very first time in her life. "Elara," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Please." I met her terrified eyes. The exact same piercing, blue-gray eyes I saw reflected in the bathroom mirror every single morning. "You possessed 15 entire years to say the word please to me," I stated coldly. "You aggressively chose to utilize silence instead." I firmly stepped backward into the warmth of my house and aggressively slammed the heavy oak door shut. I leaned my entire body weight against the heavy wood, my heart violently pounding so hard I could physically feel the vibrations in my temples. Through the thick glass window pane, I silently watched the convoy of luxury vehicles slowly, humiliatedly begin to pull away. One by one, the agonizing crunch of gravel under heavy tires was the absolute only sound piercing the quiet morning. And then I heard a soft, hesitant knock on the wood behind me. I instantly tensed up, terrified it was my mother attempting a secondary breach. "Elara, honey, it is Josephine." I cautiously cracked the door open. Aunt Josephine stood completely alone on the freezing porch. The remaining vehicles were already rapidly disappearing down the long gravel road. She had intentionally chosen not to leave with the convoy. "May I please come inside?" she asked softly, her eyes shining with tears. I wordlessly stepped aside. She walked into the entryway, her sharp eyes slowly sweeping across the familiar room with an entirely new, devastating understanding. I absolutely should have spoken up and demanded answers decades ago. Her voice was incredibly thick and heavy with guilt. I aggressively asked Diane exactly why you never attended the gatherings. Every single year, I asked her. She always possessed a flawless, ready-made excuse. Elara strongly prefers her privacy. Elara is buried under corporate work. Elara genuinely prefers to celebrate alone. And you simply, blindly believed her lies, I asked, closing the door. I believed her. Josephine aggressively wiped her eyes. That massive failure is entirely on me. I should have picked up the phone and called you directly. I should have aggressively demanded the truth. Why exactly didn't you? I asked softly. She remained completely quiet for a very long, agonizing moment. Because it was infinitely easier not to rock the boat. Because Diane is, she desperately searched for the correct word. Incredibly convincing. And I absolutely did not want to incite a massive family conflict. So you consciously chose to prioritize a fake peace over my well-being. Yes. Absolutely no pathetic excuses, no hollow justifications. Just the brutal, unvarnished truth. Josephine slowly reached deep into her coat pocket and pulled out a meticulously folded piece of thick paper. Beatrice explicitly gave this to me. Exactly 2 months prior to her passing, she forcefully made me swear a blood oath not to reveal this to a single soul until after she was permanently gone. I cautiously took the paper and unfolded it. It was a handwritten note in Grandmother Beatrice's unmistakable script. Josephine, please ensure that Elara absolutely knows she was not experiencing paranoid delusions. The aggressive exclusion was entirely real. Absolutely everything she felt in her soul was real. My hands began to tremble violently. She intimately knew the truth, Josephine whispered. She saw absolutely everything that was happening. And she desperately wanted you to finally know that you were never, ever crazy. For the very first time that entire, explosive day, I finally allowed myself to violently break down and cry. From the safety of the living room window, I silently watched the absolute last of the luxury cars disappear down the winding gravel road. Victoria's pristine white Range Rover was the final vehicle to retreat in defeat. Through the tinted back window, I could clearly see her young daughter's terrified face pressed against the glass, utterly confused, silently watching the massive beach house slowly shrink into the distance. I briefly wondered exactly what horrific lies they would spin to explain the eviction to her. They would likely claim that Aunt Elara was completely unhinged and crazy, that she had maliciously stolen the family estate, and that she was the ultimate, dark villain in their twisted family narrative. It absolutely did not matter to me anymore. Richard's aggressive black BMW had paused briefly before pulling out onto the main highway. He had slowly lowered his tinted window and looked directly at me standing victorious in the doorway. Elara, his voice sounded incredibly exhausted and defeated. I am so profoundly sorry for absolutely everything. I coldly studied the man who had served as my passive stepfather for 27 years. The coward who had silently watched my mother systematically erase my existence and never uttered a single word in my defense. That is a decent starting point, Richard. But a pathetic apology absolutely does not undo 15 years of severe psychological abuse. He slowly nodded his head, exactly as if he had entirely expected that brutal answer. I absolutely should have done significantly more to protect you. Yes, you absolutely should have. He slowly rolled up his window and drove away into the distance. My mother absolutely never looked back a single time. She sat entirely rigid in the passenger seat of his vehicle, staring blankly straight ahead as the car made the final turn onto the main coastal highway. Deputy Marcus slowly walked up the wooden steps to stand beside me. That required an incredible amount of sheer courage, ma'am. Did it really? I asked, shaking my head slightly. It required exactly 11 months of obsessive planning and a massive folder overflowing with bulletproof legal documents. That is absolutely not courage. That is simply aggressive preparation. He offered a tiny, respectful smile. Sometimes, in the real world, those two concepts are the exact same thing. He firmly shook my hand. If you require absolutely anything else from the department, you possess my direct line. Thank you so much, Deputy, for your presence here today. Just executing my job, ma'am. He politely tipped his hat and walked back to his idling patrol car. I stood completely alone on the sprawling porch of my grandmother's estate, my multi-million-dollar estate now, and quietly listened to the soothing, rhythmic sound of the crashing ocean waves. 6 massive luxury SUVs. 23 entitled, greedy relatives. 15 agonizing years of being completely, intentionally forgotten. Absolutely all of it was finally, permanently over. Aunt Josephine remained at the house for over an hour. We honestly did not speak very much. She quietly brewed a pot of tea utilizing the brand new, expensive kettle my mother had unwittingly purchased for my kitchen, and we sat closely together in front of the roaring fireplace, silently watching the flames dance. "Please call me later this evening," she requested softly when she finally stood up to leave. I nodded. "I absolutely will." She fiercely hugged me, a genuine, warm, bone-crushing hug, not the pathetic, performative kind I had grown entirely too accustomed to at the rare family events I had been permitted to attend. Then, she walked out the door, and I was finally, truly alone. Truly, completely alone for the very first time since I had arrived at the property. I walked through the massive house incredibly slowly. Every single room felt fundamentally different now. The spaces were absolutely no longer actively haunted by the toxic ghosts of my exclusion. They were incredibly quiet, humming with vibrant, new possibility. They were entirely mine to fill with joy or leave blissfully empty, exactly as I chose. In the sprawling living room, the massive, framed photograph from 3 years ago still sat prominently on the glass coffee table. 23 beaming faces all wearing matching, obnoxious red festive sweaters. Grandmother Beatrice seated in the center. I slowly picked it up and intensely studied the image one final time. Then, I firmly placed it face down inside a dark wooden drawer. On the heavy stone mantelpiece, the smaller, delicate photograph of me and Grandmother Beatrice remained. The two of us laughing hysterically on the sunny porch. The absolute only physical image in this entire, sprawling house that had ever included my face. "I finally did it, Grandma," I whispered out loud to the empty, echoing room. I finally found the courage to show up for myself. The fire crackled warmly. The heavy waves aggressively crashed outside the reinforced windows. The massive house seemed to slowly settle around my shoulders, exactly like it was finally exhaling a breath it had been holding for decades. I slowly sat down in Grandmother Beatrice's ancient rocking chair, my chair now, and finally allowed myself to fully, violently feel absolutely everything I had been desperately holding back. The white-hot anger, the suffocating grief, the incredibly strange, hollow, aching sensation of victoriously winning a brutal war that I absolutely never should have been forced to fight in the first place. I cried. Not the quiet, polite, suppressed tears I had carefully allowed myself in Arthur's corporate office, but the ugly, messy, devastating kind of tears. The exact kind of tears I had been violently saving up for 15 years. When the torrential weeping finally ceased, the winter sun was aggressively setting over the dark water. I was entirely alone. But for the absolute first time in my existence, being entirely alone felt like a conscious, powerful choice. My choice. The chaotic barrage of digital messages violently commenced exactly 3 days after the Christmas holiday. My cellular phone, which had remained blissfully silent for the vast majority of the vacation, suddenly exploded with a relentless flood of notifications. Massive family group text threads that I had absolutely never been added to before were suddenly, aggressively including my number. Ironically, now that I had finally, explosively made myself completely impossible to ignore, several relatives were absolutely furious. "Cousin David, what you violently executed on Christmas Eve was incredibly cruel, Elara. It is a sacred holiday. You easily could have handled the situation significantly differently. Aunt Barbara, my mother's youngest sister, Beatrice would be absolutely, completely ashamed of the horrific way you treated your own blood family. Victoria, I sincerely hope you are incredibly happy with yourself for aggressively destroying our sacred family traditions. Grandma would be violently rolling in her grave right now." I absolutely did not bother to respond to a single one of those toxic messages. But there were several other, highly unexpected messages scattered amongst the vitriol. "Uncle Frank, a man who had always seemed like quiet, background noise at the chaotic family events. Elara, I honestly possessed absolutely no idea you were being intentionally excluded from the invitations. I always falsely assumed you simply desired not to attend. I am so profoundly sorry. Cousin Sarah, I actually specifically asked my mother once why you were absolutely never present at the gatherings. She explicitly told me you possessed your own independent life and didn't want to be bothered. I absolutely should have reached out to you directly. I am so incredibly sorry. Another distant cousin, someone I barely even remembered the name of, I literally just discovered that Diane explicitly told everyone you aggressively preferred to celebrate the holidays entirely alone. That was an absolute, fabricated lie, wasn't it? No, I whispered to the empty room. It absolutely was not the truth. I learned a massive, profound lesson reading those frantic messages over the next 3 days. For 15 entire years, my mother had maintained absolute, tyrannical control over the family narrative. She aggressively told absolutely everyone in our social circle that I was fiercely private, stubbornly independent, and that I actively, consciously chose a life of isolation. And they had all blindly, willingly believed her fabricated lies, simply because choosing to believe her was infinitely easier than questioning the matriarch. Now, with the absolute, unvarnished truth violently exposed to the light, some of them were finally beginning to look backward. They were finally beginning to remember all the unanswered questions, the glaring inconsistencies, and the missing pieces of the puzzle. Absolutely not all of them, of course. A significant portion of the family would absolutely never believe anything other than the fabricated narrative where I was the cruel, unhinged villain. But some of them did. Aunt Josephine called my phone every single day, just to briefly check in, just to chat about mundane things. It was significantly more genuine family contact than I had experienced in years, and it was absolutely enough. For right now, it was more than enough. Richard unexpectedly called my phone late on New Year's Eve. I almost hit the ignore button, but some strange, unresolved instinct compelled me to swipe the screen and accept the call. Elara. His voice sounded incredibly exhausted, significantly older and frilier than I remembered. Thank you so much for deciding to pick up the phone. I waited in complete silence. I desperately need you to know something, he continued, his breath heavy over the line. About absolutely everything that transpired over the past 15 years. I am actively listening, Richard. I honestly did not comprehend the full, horrific extent of the abuse. I intimately knew Diane harbored highly complicated, negative feelings regarding your existence. I knew she experienced severe, psychological difficulties simply being in the exact same room with you sometimes. But I absolutely, genuinely did not know she was actively, maliciously excluding you from the family. How exactly is that logically possible, Richard? I asked, my voice cold as ice. You were physically present at every single Christmas gathering. She aggressively controlled absolutely every single detail. His voice violently cracked slightly. The formal invitations, the event planning, the curated guest lists. Whenever I directly inquired about your absence, she smoothly stated that you absolutely did not want to attend. Elara strongly prefers to maintain her personal space, she repeated every single time. And you never once attempted to verify that information. You never once bothered to pick up the phone and call me yourself to ask. A long, agonizing pause hung on the line. No, Elara. I absolutely did not. Why exactly didn't you? Because he let out a long, shaky exhale. Because I blindly, foolishly trusted her judgment. Because it was infinitely easier not to cause a massive conflict. There it was again. The exact same, pathetic excuse Aunt Josephine had offered. The exact same excuse absolutely everyone in that family had utilized. It was simply easier not to intervene. Your grandmother Beatrice actually called my private cell phone once, Richard suddenly added. It was approximately 1 year prior to her passing. She aggressively demanded to know exactly why I passively sat by and allowed Diane to completely erase you from existence. Those were her exact, verbatim words. What exactly did you tell her in response? I absolutely did not possess a valid answer for her. I still completely lack an answer. He paused, clearing his throat. I am absolutely not calling you tonight to beg for your forgiveness, Elara. I explicitly know that I absolutely do not deserve it. I simply wanted you to know that I finally see the reality of the situation now. I see exactly what Diane maliciously did, and exactly what I cowardly allowed to happen by doing absolutely nothing to stop it. I sat in silence and considered his profound, heavy words. The ultimate passive observer. The cowardly, silent witness. 27 entire years of quietly watching a child be abused and never once intervening to stop the bleeding. Thank you so much for finally telling me the truth, Richard. Is there absolutely anything I can do to assist you right now? Not right now, Richard. But thank you for offering. It was significantly more effort than my own biological mother had ever exerted. My mother finally called my phone exactly 1 week later. I instantly recognized the local number flashing on my screen. The exact same 10-digit number that had absolutely never called me on my birthdays, never sent a single text message on the holidays, and absolutely never reached out for 15 years unless she urgently required a favor. I answered the call anyway. I desperately needed to hear exactly what absurd justification she would attempt to spin. Elara. Honey. Her voice was dripping with artificial, saccharine honey. Incredibly careful and measured. The exact same manipulative voice she universally deployed whenever she desperately wanted to extract something from me. I strongly believe we have experienced a terrible, catastrophic misunderstanding. Have we really, Mom? The frantic holiday season simply gets so incredibly stressful for everyone. People occasionally say horrific things they absolutely do not mean in the heat of the moment. I am absolutely certain we can sit down and work this minor issue out as a family. Work exactly what out, Mom? The estate, of course. Her vocal tone shifted slightly. It was still artificially sweet, but it now carried a sharp, jagged edge of desperation. That massive house holds such profound, irreplaceable sentimental value for the entire extended family. Perhaps we could arrange some sort of legally binding, shared ownership agreement. I could even generously offer to handle the tedious scheduling of the property maintenance for you. And the answer is absolutely no. Complete silence descended upon the line. Excuse me? No, Mom. I am absolutely not agreeing to any shared ownership arrangement. I am absolutely not arranging any shared maintenance schedules with you. This is entirely, legally my property. Grandmother explicitly left it exclusively to me. Your poor grandmother was absolutely not thinking clearly at the end. The aggressive corporate lawyers. The corporate lawyers thoroughly reviewed the documentation for 11 entire months. The will is absolutely legally valid. It is entirely over. Her voice abruptly dropped all pretenses of artificial sweetness. You are being completely, utterly, obnoxiously unreasonable. I am simply being incredibly clear, Mom. There is a massive difference between the two concepts. I am absolutely still your biological mother, Elara. I closed my eyes and took a deep, cleansing breath. Successfully being a mother requires significantly more effort than simple biology, Mom. You aggressively taught me that brutal lesson yourself. What exactly is that cryptic statement supposed to mean? It means you spent 30 entire years desperately attempting to erase the memory of a dead man, and you maliciously, systematically erased your own daughter instead. And now, the process is finalized. I am completely done. Elara, if you hang up this. Goodbye, Mom. I immediately disconnected the call. Then I aggressively blocked her phone number across all my devices. It was the absolute first time in my entire 32 years of existence that I had successfully ended a conversation with my mother entirely on my own terms. The very first time I had finally, permanently stopped waiting for an apology that was absolutely never going to materialize. It felt exactly like finally putting down an impossibly heavy boulder that I had not even realized I was breaking my back to carry. I need to quickly address a question I know many of you are currently screaming at the screen. Did I ever eventually find it in my heart to forgive my mother? I promise I will thoroughly address that. But first, I want to hear your unfiltered opinions. Do you genuinely believe that toxic, narcissistic individuals like Diane possess the psychological capacity to actually change their behavior, or is their cruelty simply hardwired into their DNA? Comment change if you firmly believe in the concept of second chances. Comment done if you believe certain abusive patterns can absolutely never be broken. There is absolutely no judgment here either way. I genuinely, deeply want to know your perspective on human nature. Now, let us dive back into the conclusion of the story. In early February, I made a massive, life-altering professional decision. I formally requested a meeting with my corporate firm and asked to transition to a fully remote working arrangement. They readily agreed to the terms. This was partially because I was highly successful and invaluable at my job, and partially because post-pandemic workplace flexibility had rapidly become the corporate norm. I aggressively packed up the entirety of my cramped Raleigh apartment, loaded my reliable car to the brim, and confidently drove back to the Outer Banks. The sprawling coastal beach house was patiently waiting for my return. I spent the very first week meticulously settling into the massive space. I aggressively rearranged the antique furniture. I painted the walls of the master bedroom a soft, calming shade of gray-blue. I systematically made the entire, sprawling space unequivocally mine, instead of allowing it to remain a haunted museum filled with toxic family memories I had absolutely never been permitted to be a part of. One sunny afternoon, while deeply deep-cleaning a forgotten closet located inside Grandmother Beatrice's old study, I stumbled across a heavy wooden box I had absolutely never seen before. Tucked inside the box were dozens upon dozens of sealed letters. They were written to various extended family members, but they had absolutely never been mailed out. The vast majority of the correspondence was entirely mundane. Simple thank you notes, generic birthday wishes, and trivial complaints regarding the coastal weather. But resting at the absolute bottom of the box, I discovered a pristine envelope with my name elegantly written across it. For Elara, to be opened only when she is truly ready. Tucked inside was a single, fragile page of stationery. My dearest, brilliant granddaughter, you absolutely do not require their toxic approval to possess inherent value in this universe. You exclusively require the approval of your own soul. They desperately, maliciously tried to make you feel incredibly small, but small, insignificant objects absolutely do not cast massive shadows. You are absolutely never small, Elara. You are simply patiently waiting in the dark for your explosive moment to arrive. I deeply hope I am absolutely not physically present to witness it unfold. Not because I do not desperately want to see your victory, but because I intrinsically know you absolutely must execute this maneuver entirely alone. You desperately need to prove to your own soul that you are capable of surviving the fire. When the ashes finally settle, please remember this. Living a beautiful, successful life is absolutely not about exacting petty revenge. It is simply about finally embracing the unvarnished truth. I love you infinitely. I always, always have. Grandmother Beatrice. I sat on the floor of the closet and tightly clutched the fragile letter to my chest for a very long time. That exact same weekend, Aunt Josephine drove out to the coast to visit me. We happily cooked a massive dinner together in the renovated kitchen, an activity neither of us had shared with a family member in decades. The evening was incredibly quiet, deeply simple, and for the absolute first time in my entire life, it genuinely felt like I was finally home. Victoria unexpectedly arrived at the property entirely unannounced in mid-March. I was peacefully sitting on the wraparound porch, reading a novel, when her pristine white Range Rover aggressively pulled into the gravel driveway. I silently watched her sit paralyzed in the driver's seat for a full 60 seconds before she finally gathered the courage to open the car door. She walked slowly and hesitantly toward the porch, looking exactly as if she were cautiously approaching a highly dangerous, unpredictable wild animal. I am absolutely not here to initiate a fight, she stated defensively. I slowly placed my book down onto the table. Then why exactly are you here, Victoria? She abruptly stopped at the bottom of the wooden porch steps. She looked drastically, fundamentally different. She appeared incredibly exhausted, deeply uncertain, and possessed absolutely none of the polished, arrogant confidence I intimately remembered. Can we please just talk for a few minutes? I wordlessly gestured to the empty rocking chair situated directly beside me. She slowly climbed the stairs and rigidly sat down, her physical movements appearing incredibly stiff and highly uncomfortable. For a very long, agonizing moment, neither of us uttered a single syllable. I honestly did not know, she finally whispered, staring blankly out at the crashing ocean. About exactly how maliciously Mom treated you behind closed doors. I mean, I obviously knew she heavily favored me. That dynamic was glaringly obvious to a blind person. But I genuinely did not know she was actively, aggressively keeping you away from the family. Would knowing that truth have actually mattered to you, Victoria? She violently flinched at the direct question. Then, she answered incredibly quietly. I honestly do not know. That is the absolute, brutally honest answer. I intensely studied my older sister, my half-sister. Technically, the ultimate golden child. The individual who had absolutely never been forced to violently fight for a basic seat at the family dinner table. You absolutely never once questioned the toxic dynamic, I stated softly. Why? Because I was absolutely never physically present in the line of fire. You simply, blindly accepted the reality you were handed. I did, she admitted, slowly looking down at her manicured hands. I completely, foolishly believed exactly what I was constantly told. I believed that you simply did not want to be around our family. That you aggressively preferred being completely isolated and alone. Did that narrative actually make logical sense to your brain? That your own sister would actively choose to be entirely alone every single Christmas for 15 consecutive years? She absolutely did not provide an answer. We both intimately knew she had absolutely never bothered to analyze the situation that deeply. I am absolutely not emotionally ready to attempt to build a relationship with you, she stated finally, standing up from the chair. But I desperately wanted you to know that I am finally starting to view our history through a significantly different, clearer lens. That is honestly significantly more self-awareness than I ever expected from you. I offered a slow nod. Thank you for possessing the courage to tell me that in person. She retreated to her vehicle and left exactly 30 minutes later. It was absolutely not a grand, tearful reconciliation, but it was undeniably something to build upon. Over the course of the next few incredibly healing months, I learned a profound, life-altering lesson regarding the concept of personal boundaries. Healthy boundaries are absolutely not impenetrable brick walls. They are simply sturdy doors equipped with heavy locks. And you are the absolute only person who possesses the authority to decide who receives a key. Regarding my mother, I maintained absolute, complete no contact. 0 phone calls, 0 text messages, 0 emotional explanations. I absolutely did not owe her any form of closure. She had possessed 15 entire years to ask questions and attempt to build a relationship, and she had aggressively chosen malicious silence instead. Now, I was actively choosing the exact same path. With Richard, I maintained a highly cautious, heavily restricted line of communication. A single, brief email exchanged exactly once a month. Mundane updates regarding the maintenance of the coastal house. Incredibly polite, but entirely distant. He had chosen to be a passive, silent bystander while I was abused for 27 years. I was absolutely not going to pretend that cowardly observation was somehow equivalent to paternal love. With Victoria, the door was technically unlocked, but it was only pushed open a mere fraction of an inch. She occasionally sent me brief text messages. Digital photographs of her growing daughter, random, trivial observations about the shifting weather patterns. I only responded when I felt the genuine emotional capacity to do so. Absolutely 0 pressure, 0 toxic expectations. With the remainder of the extended family tree, the access varied wildly. The few relatives who had possessed the basic decency to proactively reach out and genuinely apologize received polite responses. The relatives who had aggressively chosen to defend my mother's horrific abuse received absolute, permanent silence. I was not keeping a petty, vindictive scorecard, but I was absolutely paying close attention to their true character. And Aunt Josephine? Josephine received a permanent spare key to the estate. Are you absolutely, undeniably certain about this? She asked, holding the small brass key in her palm exactly as if it were a highly explosive device. You are literally the only person in that entire house who ever bothered to ask where I was, I stated firmly. For 15 agonizing years, you were the only human being who even noticed that I was missing from the table. I absolutely should have done significantly more than just notice the absence. You are actively doing significantly more now, Aunt Josephine. That is exactly what truly matters in the end. She began visiting the estate every single alternating weekend. We took long, peaceful walks along the freezing shoreline. We swapped incredible, vibrant stories about Grandmother Beatrice. We aggressively built something entirely new and beautiful directly on top of the smoking ashes of something hopelessly broken. I absolutely did not slam the heavy door on my entire family. I simply permanently stopped exhausting myself by holding the door wide open for people who absolutely never, ever intended to walk through it. There is a massive, fundamental psychological difference between tragic isolation and healthy boundaries. Isolation is suffocating loneliness. Boundaries are absolute, unshakable peace. I was finally, successfully learning how to identify the critical difference. This specific year, I proudly hosted the Christmas holiday gathering at the estate. I absolutely did not host 23 entitled, demanding people. I did not host individuals who had spent 15 entire years aggressively pretending I did not exist on this planet. I hosted exactly 4 people. Aunt Josephine arrived first, carefully carrying a heavy casserole dish and a premium bottle of wine. I found Grandmother Beatrice's specific recipe buried in her old, dusty cookbook, she announced, beaming as she handed me the warm dish. My 2 absolute closest, most fiercely loyal friends from Raleigh arrived next, Maya and Chloe. The incredible women who had served as my true, chosen family when my actual, biological family had maliciously forgotten me. They had enthusiastically driven over 3 hours just to be present in my home. And finally, Arthur, a senior colleague from my corporate firm who had tragically finalized a brutal divorce earlier that year and possessed absolutely nowhere else to celebrate the holiday. When I had extended the invitation, he had stared at me in pure shock, exactly as if I had casually offered to donate him a kidney. "You barely even know me outside the office," he had stammered. "I intimately know exactly what it feels like to be completely alone on a major holiday," I had replied softly. Absolutely nobody should ever be forced to endure that feeling if they do not explicitly want to. So, here we all were. 4 random people gathered around a massive dining table originally designed to comfortably seat 12. A roaring fire violently crackled in the hearth. Hundreds of candles provided a warm, glowing light, and the intoxicating, nostalgic aroma of Grandmother Beatrice's legendary recipe completely filled the cavernous house. Resting prominently on the stone mantelpiece, I had carefully placed her framed photograph. The specific image of the 2 of us laughing hysterically together. The absolute only photograph in this entire, sprawling house that had ever included my face. Aunt Josephine proudly raised her crystal wine glass. To our beloved Beatrice, and to the incredibly resilient granddaughter who finally reminded us all what the concept of true family actually signifies. We joyously clinked our glasses together. Outside the reinforced windows, the heavy ocean waves violently crashed against the dark shoreline. Inside the house, the warm conversation flowed incredibly easily. Absolutely no terrifying walking on eggshells. Absolutely no aggressively monitoring every single word I spoke. Absolutely no feeling like a completely unwanted intruder trespassing in my own existence. I slowly looked around the glowing table at the smiling faces of the specific people who had actively, consciously chosen to be here. People who genuinely, deeply wanted me to be present. "Thank you so incredibly much," I whispered softly into the room, "for choosing to come." Maya fiercely squeezed my hand under the table. "Thank you so much for inviting us into your sanctuary. This place is absolutely breathtaking." It truly was breathtaking. And for the absolute first time in my entire 32 years of existence, I genuinely felt like I completely belonged inside its walls. Long after everyone had safely retired to their respective guest rooms for the night, I silently slipped out onto the massive, wraparound wooden porch. The freezing December air was incredibly sharp and biting, heavily carrying the intoxicating, briny scent of the churning ocean. Millions of brilliant stars were aggressively scattered across the pitch-black sky exactly like spilled, glowing sugar. Somewhere far off in the misty distance, a deep, mournful foghorn sounded. I slowly sat down in Grandmother Beatrice's ancient, creaking rocking chair, my rocking chair now, and finally allowed myself to deeply process the sheer magnitude of the past 12 months. I thought about the 15 agonizing years before that. I thought intensely about the terrified, invisible woman I used to be and the fierce, unyielding woman I had ultimately become. I used to foolishly believe that genuine forgiveness required aggressively pretending that the horrific abuse had never actually occurred. I falsely believed that being the bigger person mandated violently swallowing your own agonizing pain and forcing a smile through the blood. I absolutely do not believe that toxic garbage anymore. Certain atrocities absolutely cannot and should not be forgiven. Not because you harbor a dark, bitter soul, but because true forgiveness inherently requires genuine acknowledgement of the crime. It requires profound, authentic remorse. It requires massive, systemic behavioral change. And some broken people will simply never, ever possess the capacity to offer those things. My mother had desperately attempted to call my cell phone exactly 3 more times since I had permanently blocked her primary number. Every single time, she utilized a different, spoofed phone number. Every single time, she deployed a drastically different, manipulative psychological approach. Explosive anger, suffocating guilt, pathetic bargaining. But she absolutely never, not a single time, offered a genuine apology. I surprisingly did not harbor an ounce of hatred toward her. That profound realization actually shocked me. I genuinely thought I would be entirely consumed by burning hatred after surviving everything she did to me. But maintaining pure hatred requires a massive expenditure of psychological energy. It ruthlessly demands valuable space inside your head and your heart. And I had already sacrificed entirely too much of my life and energy to her. What I felt radiating in my chest now was something infinitely smaller, significantly quieter. It was an emotion closely resembling profound pity, heavily mixed with cold, clinical acceptance. She fundamentally was exactly who she was. She had actively made her horrific, destructive choices. And now I was aggressively, finally making my own. Establishing ironclad boundaries is absolutely not about exacting petty punishment. Boundaries are entirely about psychological protection. They're about aggressively choosing exactly where your finite energy is allowed to flow. I had desperately spent 32 agonizing years aggressively trying to earn a pathetic seat at a family table that fundamentally did not want my presence. Now, I proudly possess my very own table. It was undeniably smaller, significantly quieter, but every single human being sitting there had actively, joyously chosen to be present. 0 toxic obligations, 0 simmering resentments, 0 haunting ghosts. I rocked slowly back and forth in the wooden chair, quietly listening to the rhythmic crashing of the dark waves. For the absolute first time in my entire existence, I was no longer desperately waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was just finally, beautifully present in the moment. On the bright, freezing morning of Christmas Day, I unexpectedly found it. I was quietly cleaning up the massive living room from the previous night's festivities, carefully putting away the expensive serving dishes, when I suddenly noticed a slight anomaly hidden directly behind Grandmother Beatrice's silver-framed photograph on the stone mantelpiece. A sealed envelope, crisp and cream-colored, heavily tucked into the narrow gap between the backing of the frame and the glass. My legal name was elegantly written across the front in her unmistakable, looping handwriting. Directly below my name, a specific, chilling instruction to be opened exclusively on your very first Christmas as the rightful owner. My hands began to tremble violently as I carefully tore open the heavy paper flap. My dearest, brave Elara. If you are currently reading these words, it absolutely means you successfully executed the plan. You finally, permanently stopped allowing them to make you invisible. I desperately wish I could be physically present to witness your glorious victory. I spent decades silently watching your mother systematically attempt to erase your existence, and it completely, utterly broke my aging heart. I absolutely should have aggressively spoken up. I should have fought significantly harder for you. But Diane is my own flesh and blood daughter, and I foolishly, pathetically kept hoping against hope that she would eventually realize the error of her ways and change. She absolutely didn't, and I am so profoundly, eternally sorry for my cowardice. I legally bequeath this massive estate to you because you undeniably earned it. Not through dark, manipulative scheming or deception, like they will undoubtedly, maliciously accuse you of doing, but through the power of pure, unadulterated love. A pure, simple love that absolutely never demanded a single thing in return. You possess your biological father's exact, striking eyes, Elara. Did I ever take the time to explicitly tell you that? David was a genuinely good, decent man. He was wildly impractical, yes. He was a starry-eyed dreamer, most certainly. But his core was fundamentally good. Your mother simply never possessed the capacity to see that goodness. She only saw the massive societal status she believed she had sacrificed by choosing to love him. You biologically inherited his beautiful eyes, his expansive heart, and his unique, incredible ability to spot beauty in the darkest places where other people refuse to look. The old adage claims that living well is the ultimate revenge. But I strongly believe that living authentically true to yourself is infinitely better than petty revenge. Be entirely true to yourself, Elara. Be exactly who you are meant to be. Absolutely never allow anyone to aggressively force you to make yourself small again. I love you infinitely. I am incredibly, fiercely proud of you. And wherever my soul currently resides, I promise you, I am proudly watching your victory. Grandma Beatrice. I forcefully pressed the fragile letter tightly against my chest and tightly closed my eyes. Thank you so incredibly much, I whispered out loud to the empty, sunlit room. The fireplace warmly crackled, the ocean waves steadily rolled against the shoreline, and somewhere deep inside my soul, I inherently knew she had heard my gratitude. Before I finally conclude this narrative, I desperately want to share some clinical thoughts on exactly why this tragedy occurred. I do not offer this analysis to excuse anyone's horrific behavior, but simply to help us all understand the mechanics of the abuse. My mother is absolutely not a literal, supernatural monster. Honestly, it would be significantly easier for my brain to process if I could just slap the label of pure evil on her and effortlessly move on with my life. But human psychology is infinitely more complex and devastating than that. Here is the unvarnished truth I have finally come to believe. Diane impulsively married my biological father when she was merely 19 years old. She was incredibly young, fiercely idealistic, and stubbornly convinced that passionate love would magically conquer every obstacle. When the crushing, brutal reality inevitably struck, the grinding poverty, the profound lack of stability, the sudden, horrific death, she simply could not emotionally process the magnitude of the grief. So, her brain aggressively converted the agonizing grief into toxic shame. In her deeply diseased mind, choosing to love David became her ultimate, catastrophic mistake in life, and my very physical existence became the daily, living proof of that massive failure. Every single time she looked directly into my eyes, she did not see her innocent daughter, she only saw the reflection of her own perceived ruin. That psychological explanation absolutely does not excuse a single fraction of what she did. Absolutely nothing excuses 15 entire years of systematic, aggressive exclusion, relentless psychological gaslighting, and severe emotional abandonment. But it does provide a clinical explanation. And acquiring that deep understanding finally helped me permanently release the agonizing question that had violently haunted me for decades. What exactly did I do wrong to deserve this? The absolute, undeniable answer is nothing. I did absolutely nothing wrong. I was simply incredibly, tragically unlucky enough to be born possessing the eyes of the wrong man. As for my own culpability in the dynamic, my ultimate weakness was my infinite patience. It was my aggressive deployment of kindness, completely devoid of enforcing personal boundaries. I squandered 15 entire years operating under the delusion that if I just remained quiet enough, behaved perfectly enough, and was entirely undemanding enough, they would eventually magically open their eyes and truly see my value. They absolutely never did. Because here is the brutal, ultimate truth of the universe. Some broken people simply do not want to see you. And absolutely no amount of violently shrinking your own soul will ever magically correct their damaged vision. The ultimate, life-altering lesson? Absolutely do not waste your precious water on completely dead plants. Do not aggressively knock on heavy doors that clearly refuse to open. Do not pathetically beg for a cramped seat at a table where your presence is aggressively unwanted. Confidently build your very own, beautiful table instead. And that is exactly what I am proudly doing right now. One beautiful, unburdened day at a time. Thank you so incredibly much for staying by my side until the absolute end of this journey. If this specific narrative deeply touched something inside your spirit, please consider leaving a comment. I want to hear your story of survival. Have you ever felt completely, utterly invisible in your own family? What exact, terrifying steps did you take to change your reality? If you genuinely enjoyed this video, there is another incredibly powerful story waiting for you in the description box below. It is about a brave woman who aggressively gave her toxic family absolutely everything until she finally realized she was giving them nothing but the power to destroy her. Click the link and I will see you over there.